Welcome to the Keen on Yoga podcast, bringing you the stories of many people who in various ways are attempting to walk the path of yoga. Our intention is to inspire your own practice and commitment to yoga beyond the mat and in all areas of life. We consider this an offering, a service to the community and labour of love. If you feel inclined, any donations are appreciated. Just visit our page and click the donate button at www.keenonyoga.co.uk/podcast. I hope you enjoy the show. So here with me today is Alexander Medin. He was certified to teach Ashtanga in 2004 by Pattabhi Jois. Grew up in Norway, where I think you're a previous national boxing champion. Is that correct, Alex?
Yeah, that's correct. In 1987.
Subsequently a ballet dancer. And then I knew that he was a legend in Mysore because he built a house in Mysore and learnt the local language there, as well as learning Sanskrit. And now, mainly, I think you're back in Norway. Is that right? And in the mountains right now.
Yeah, now I'm on holiday with my family up in the mountains. But just a few corrections. I was certified by Guruji in 2003, okay. and I did learn some very basic Kannada to get by, but not enough to have a deep philosophical conversation with anybody. But Sanskrit I learned very well, and that I can speak fluently.
Very humble. Welcome, Alex, to the Keen on Yoga podcast. So let's just rehash a little bit and rewind it. How did you get into yoga?
Well, it was actually a coincidence. I was out with my, eldest son, Benjamin. He was 5 years at the time. And we were walking, we were actually on the tube in Stockholm. And I met a friend who was going to yoga class. And I thought, oh, that would be interesting to join. So I joined. And after the class, I remember lying in Shavasana and just feeling, wow, this is beautiful. This was just had an effect on me. I felt peace, centered, a kind of harmony. And I just wanted to learn it further. So I kind of got hold of a book that Lino Mille and John Scott had just put out. So I kind of taught myself the primary series in 2 weeks from watching the book. And it started from there.
At the time you were a ballet dancer, right? Was that where you were working as professionally?
Yeah. I was a ballet dancer, but I wasn't any good, I was like, I had a background from boxing, so I was a little bit tight in my shoulder, and I was not the most graceful ballet dancer, but I was like kind of the wild animal that was kind of typecast and put into kind of various productions, but I was never good enough to make it into the opera or the great ballet companies. I mean, I did work with Birgit Kullberg in Sweden and a few other good companies, but that was just luck that I was able to get those jobs. But as a ballet dancer, I was actually struggling, and always when you go to audition and you always turn down, and it's kind of hard. But then you find work, and as a young artist you find work in all kinds of way, and sometimes you kick around in a few musicals, so you work in a drag show, whatever it takes just to get money, So yeah, I did no work in a drag show, but I did audition once. I got turned down.
You learned the primary series in 2 weeks, and then you started teaching quite soon after.
Well, I didn't really learn I taught it myself from the book. Yeah. And I was, I was flexible, and I remember I came to London in 96, and there was like a guy called John who'd started the yoga place or something. It was somewhere in St. John's, and John Scott was just setting up a Mysore style program there in the morning, and then I used to just come and study with him in the morning.
Right. I didn't know you studied with John.
Okay. Yeah, I'm very grateful. I studied like the first year with John Scott, I studied 6 months with him, and then after I went to work as a cook, and I lived in Ibiza for 4 months with a self-proclaimed tantric mystic called Godfrey Devereux, which was quite an experience.
Yeah. I know Godfrey. Yeah.
He was a fascinating guy. He taught me many good things. And then I went to work for Derek in Greece for 4 months later.
I didn't know you went to the practice place.
Practice place. Yeah, I was there in Agios Pavlos.
I worked there.
Oh, yeah, no, I have good memory. I mean, Pierre from Sweden, he came there also first year when I was there, and then he and Radha ended up becoming together.
No, Pierre and I are good friends from that time, yeah.
You have to give him my regards when you...
I will, yeah.
I haven't spoken to him I haven't spoken to him in 10 years, probably. I saw him in Mysore maybe 10, 15 years ago, but since that, I haven't spoken to him. But so I'm very grateful to my early teachers like, John Scott, Godfrey Devereux, Derek Ireland. They kind of put me on the track. And then I came to Mysore first time in 98. And then I thought I knew it all, but I had to relearn everything.
Yeah, I don't think that's an unusual experience in going to Mysore for the first time.
Yeah.
Well, what were your first experiences like of Mysore? I mean, it was, it seems like late in the day compared to a lot of people going to Mysore, but you were still pretty early on for most people listening to this podcast.
Well, I came first time in 98, and of course, it was different on many levels. Of course, it was, we were on the most important level, it was a much more intimate scene where there were only like maybe 30, 40, 50 people at the time. So you knew most of the people who were there, people hanged out, and we have the whole different relationship with Sharat and Guruji because they were much more innocent and naive and easy about their teaching, and things weren't as kind of formalized, and now it's become like institutionalized, So on that level, it was very different. Of course, being in India, when I first came, there were hardly any cars in Mysore. There were just two-wheelers because that was the standard kind of family vehicles, and it wasn't that much pollution, and it was really a beautiful place to be. And also considering the whole kind of boom of Indian materialism, people were much more open and friendly and less kind of greedy on the money as India has become in the last...
Have you been back recently?
Yeah, I was in India just last year. I go to India every year. And I was in Mysore too for a short visit.
Oh, you went?
Oh, yeah.
Did you go? Did you go and see Sharat?
Well, I kind of tried to go and see Sharat, but he had no interest in seeing me.
yeah, we might come to that later. And you said that the teaching was how I can't remember how you described it, less formal or less standardized. Was there differences in the teaching in the way it was presented or the actual structure of the series, or were you allowed a bit more leeway?
Well, I think that definitely Guruji was much. I think he was both him and Sharat. They were kind of finding out what worked and maybe didn't work so well. In the beginning, when I came, they took people a much quicker through the series, and then they stopped and become much slower. And it was also when we would sit around at kind of in the front porch, so the kind of Guruji's hallways on the house. We would just and have what started off like a conference after his wife Amma had died. It was very informal, and it was just a chat, and somehow it's just a way to hang out with Guruji because he was sad and he was lonely. People would just ask him questions about everything related to yoga and life, and people would just sit around like friends having a casual, easy time, and a lot of laughs, really. Later, things penciled more only, through serious, more wiring questions on yoga, and the whole kind of conference became more formalized and standardized. But in the beginning, it was just a very kind of relaxed, casual manner. But there's, of course, much to say about how Mysore have changed, because in the beginning it was very few people, and when there is few people, you have an intimate connection with your teacher, and he kind of knows most of them by name. And although, you know, it really take a long time to learn some of the names, but after a while he did, and he had an interest in, you know, to find out about people more. Now when things has become so big and so popular, naturally some of the essential things are lost, like that intimate relationship. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's some terrible things to see. I mean, to say about, you know, what happened recently with, you know, Karen Haberman or Karen Rain's accusations of Pattabhi Jois. And I mean, I was there practicing in the room with her, but I never saw any of that. I mean, I remember on one occasion she talking about it and laughing it off. But I just, yeah, how Pattabhi Jois has, you know, been turned into a kind of sexual predator and violator. That is just terribly sad and shocking. And I never knew Pattabhi Jois like that. And I never saw that, although I hear some people talking about it, but nobody really took it seriously, shockingly enough. So, but what I mean about, you know, an intimate relationship of yoga is like there is trust, there is openness, there is surrender. And that I really saw in the early days in Mysore. Guruji had a way of really observing people from his chair in the corner, you know, even with his eyes shut. People
sleeping.
Yeah, exactly. But he had a way of sensing and feeling people, which was quite remarkable, actually. And also seeing people going through the various changes and openings that they had, and the effect of the yoga postures had to them on a good level and sometimes on a negative level. Because on a good level, yoga refines us, it opens us, and it helps us to understand, dissolve, and transcend our ego. But on a negative level, when the yoga doesn't really work, we become more arrogant, hard, rigid, you know, mentally stiff, and egomaniacs. And
do you think that Guruji gave support at that time? Did you feel that you were held in that process a little bit more than just simply here's your asanas? Did you feel that there was some kind of coaxing or kind of guidance towards the correct path, and rather than the obstacle or falling into the trap of getting, you know, which we see often now, is that people, you know, there was no extra help?
Well, I think that Guruji was very clear, and he saw people very well. And I can just speak from personal experience, because I came with a bit of a personal agenda. I wanted to kind of wrestle out the system out of Guruji's hands, and I wanted to learn it and kind of master it, and you know, go through the series as quick as I can. And I think Guruji saw that, and he saw that I had a, you know, big ego and a strong ambition, and he kind of put on the brakes and just kind of, it's almost like, I would say he kind of bullied me in a way. For 3 months or 4 months, he just like, I don't say this is a good pedagogical approach. Because obviously it doesn't work for everybody. But if you consider the way Krishnamacharya, Pattabhi Jois, B.K.S. Iyengar were taught, that was the kind of tradition that they were a part of, unfortunately. It was a bit of a tough love, and if you can handle it, great, and if you didn't, you broke. And you know,
how did that bear itself out?
Well, it doesn't, like I say, it doesn't work for all people, and it's not healthy. And you know, the sad thing is when people try to act and behave like Guruji themselves, just try to copy his style or his method of teaching.
Yeah.
But
you say he was...
but I just want to finish. But I must say that Guruji's method worked on me. I was a kind of arrogant sod coming to Mysore, being a little lost and bewildered, and he just kind of grounded me. And he were able to hold up a mirror, and he said, "Look, take a look at yourself. Use this practice as a method to take a look at yourself." And at that time in my life, that was helpful, and I learned a lot. And I actually didn't have any ambition or want to come back to Mysore. As a matter of fact, after 3 months, I went to Pattabhi Jois and asked to get my money back because I didn't want to stay there. And he just said, no, it's not possible. So I had to stay for an extra month. And within that month, like a turning point happened. And then I ended up coming back for, almost 20 years. Well, 10 years of, 11 years of his life. And then up to recently with Sharat. So I have, I spent 20 years in Mysore seeing the good things and the sometimes side effects of the practice. And there's a lot to say from that, about that, of course.
Just to clarify, how we were kind of intrigued at how his method played out on a practical level. He wasn't kind of beating you with a stick, was he? What was the bullying that you how did that look? What was his method?
It was just it was just that whatever I did, it was not good enough.
Okay, right.
And whenever I made a comment, or he would laugh and he would ignore me, or he would ridicule me in front of other people. And in a way, instead of just feeling sorry for myself, or at first I kind of got angry at him and thought, what's wrong? But then I realized he was trying to kind of show me something. And that's why I thought. And I feel that the moment I actually were ready to receive his teaching and method in the way I could receive it, rather than the way I wanted it. I mean, in the way when he saw I was ready and fit for it, then a subtle change happened. And then from there on, really, it was just a beautiful journey of discovery. And from seeing a man that I thought was a bit kind of, just hungry for money, greedy, and didn't really care about people, I realized he really cared. And a year later, when I came back with my sister, and our brother had just died and under some tragical circumstances, and he was very caring and accommodating, and let me practice and stay for a long time without even paying. So I have a tremendous depth of gratitude towards Guruji as a person, for what he gave me, what he taught me, and the insights that he opened into the world of yoga for me. But I must also say that, coming to know Guruji well, I also see, so he had many limitations, and he was filled of ignorance, avidya, on many levels, like we all are. But he was very open about it, and he didn't try to play a guru. He just kind of laughed at the whole thing, really. And he didn't really, teaching was just something he did because he loved it. And that's what he knew. I remember I had a friend from the Sanskrit college called Vinayaka, but that came with me to London in 2002 when Guruji was there. And I remember him saying to Vinayaka, look at this is ridiculous. People show up in this many numbers. And I never really looked for that, he said. So I think Guruji was very humble about the very fact that people became obsessed about this physical form of yoga that he taught. He never tried to, present himself like a a great teacher or anything like that. It was more like accidentally, and he kind of enjoyed playing the part for the rest part of his life.
Do you think it changed him having the popularity that he latterly got?
Obviously, I think money and fame, it's impossible. So to a certain extent it did, but I would say that he remained innocent to the day he died. That was my experience of him. And I really felt that he had a tremendous love for yoga and Advaita Vedanta philosophy. Actually, I would say more for Advaita Vedanta philosophy. He held Shankaracharya as like his, greatest mentor in a way. And then, of course, he loved yoga, and that whole commitment to his, understanding of Vedanta or Sanatana Dharma yoga, whatever we want to call it, I think, turned him into the great person that he was. And I think people, he was very simple and very, naive in so many ways, but his love for yoga and the truth of philosophy, the way he saw it, was adamant, and that just didn't change.
And you stayed in Mysore for a long time, right? You lived in Mysore consistently. I mean, you had a house there, right?
Well, I kind of, in 98, I lived there, and in 97, I started a program at SOAS in comparative religion and Sanskrit studies, which I did. And I also did a master's degree in, Vedic religion and Sanskrit studies. And then that I kind of finished in 2004. And then so up to 2004, I would, study in England, and whatever holiday and whatever I could leave, I would always be in Mysore. But after 2004, I went to Asia. And then I had a little bit of money that I inherited from my grandfather. And I had a friend in Hong Kong who, urged, after I lived there for a year and wanted to go and settle in Mysore to actually pursue a degree in Vedanta at the Sanskrit college. She kind of persuaded me to buy a house. And then, prices were relatively cheap compared to what they are now. So I bought a house in Mysore in 2005, I think it was 2005. And I had that up till 2-3 years ago, and I sold it.
Right, and I didn't know you could actually own property, or you could then, but maybe you can't.
I couldn't, but we was together with a friend, really, and that's how it worked out. So I was just kind of part investor, really, in the house. So
I forgot you were also teaching in Hong Kong.
Yeah, I lived in Hong Kong for many years.
I saw those brilliant photographs of you with a suit on, doing different postures on, on the tube, and I love those. Yeah. Must be still around it. Everyone can look them up.
Yeah, the urban yoga, inquiry into yoga in a kind of the busy modern lifestyle. That was just something I did when I moved there to kind of create a bit of a buzz with a photographer because but it was fun.
No, they're brilliant. I love them. What about the philosophy? You talked a lot about your study of philosophy and how, for people listening, and how kind of important or kind of fundamental is study of philosophy to the asana practice, or can you do one without the other, or do they need to go together? Can you say anything on that?
In short, without philosophy, we become blind. You can never find the deeper aspects of yoga in just practicing asana and bending and stretching and twisting and turning, unless anybody can, of course, realize the self without the teachings of previous great masters, but it's very difficult. And all the great teachings of the Shastras, the sciences from the Indian tradition, are built on the kind of authority of the scriptures. And when it comes to, the kind of whole Sanskrit tradition, they kind of very much value the. Okay, let me not get sidetracked in the whole kind of Sanskrit tradition, but let me focus on yoga. Like, let's just say, when it comes to yoga, without the teachings of Patanjali, without the guidance of Krishna and the Bhagavad Gita, without some of the modern texts, recent texts from the 15th century onwards on Hatha yoga, we don't have any clear guidance on how to know how the mind works. The beauty of the Yoga Sutras is it gives us a clear definition of kind of how the mental modification and fluctuations of the mind work. What are the kind of subliminal effects on it, like the kleshas? What are the defaults, like the antarayas that we are born with? And how does this physical body in being trapped in the mind? And the problem of kind of modern thinking is all we recognize is the I, me, and myself. And when we get caught up in the I, me, and the mind, according to the yoga tradition, of course, we eventually go wrong.
Is not the practice of yoga enough? Like, I will say that the yoga is purification, and from doing the asanas, does that not give a kind of clarity of mind enough, or do you need that's not enough? You're saying you need to also look at the text and use them as well.
To answer your question more simple and straightforward, asana is not enough. It can never be enough.
Right.
It would be to make a mockery of a beautiful tradition that has distilled wisdom of how to experience a centeredness of being. You can experience, clarity of mind, peace of mind, good help you understand the mind, unless you have a grindstone where you meet the mind with. And that's kind of why you need philosophy, because that gives you the various perspectives and analysis of the mind that will help you see the mind more clearly, and that will also give you good suggestions and guidance on how to overcome and transcend the mind, rather being trapped in the mind and repeating those kind of karmic or samsaric patterns again and again and again.
How does that inform your teaching now then? I mean, you can't just teach asana anymore if you're teaching, kind of from a fundamental philosophy perspective.
No, so, I mean, obviously, I teach Mysore style or leg classes or yoga gently in whatever way. But to me, the real yoga is life. And how do we integrate yoga into life, the day-to-day life? And the asana practice that we do is just a tool to better find our place in life and to act with greater clarity and energy in the normal things we do in life. I mean, not everybody have the privilege and also being a yoga teacher like I am, but real yoga is life, and real yoga is never about the form. And when you become obsessed with the form, sooner or later you're going to become very disappointed, because it's impossible to find the greater clarity of yoga just in the physical practice.
I've got visions of you kind of reading out the Yoga Sutras in the class as people try and do their Mysore practice. I mean,
no.
do you actually kind of integrate the philosophy, or do you just mention it to people, or the kind of conversation afterwards, or does that actually inform your teaching?
Well, first of all, it's like the duty of any yoga teacher is to try to go deeper into yoga and to become clear with yoga, with what yoga is. And when we start that journey, we realize how unclear we actually are about yoga, and how easily we get caught up in dogmas and concepts that kind of rule and the kind of condition are very understanding of it. And when I teach, I don't. Sometimes, well, actually, very often I talk about Yoga Sutras or the Bhagavad Gita, things like that. But my real, I use the physical practice that I do to try to communicate a method for people to understand yoga. And I think the physical practice that we do is a very good stepping stone to come closer to that unexplainable inner essence, that mystery of being and purity of mind that yoga ultimately is. But you can only come to that to a certain degree from the physical asana approach. You kind of need more light from the outside, from the shastras, or from, higher levels of concentration or guided meditation than just, looking at your navel or just trying to press yourself into various forms is not going to give you that purity of mind. That is a kind of fallacy of the tradition that we represent. And
yes,
a lot of people have actually become very disappointed there. But the bottom line is, like, the practice is a beautiful tool. It keeps us well, and it's a kind of mental hygiene that we do in order to kind of tap into a mysterious being within. But in order to go deeper with that and understand that, it takes like serious development of concentration, a serious steadiness and analyzing of the patterns of the mind, and recognizing how easily we get caught up in the trappings of the ego, and how our mind is kind of filled with avidya, with ignorance, which is kind of the whole breeding ground for all our further ignorant pattern that we develop. So kind of how to root out the ignorant patterns within us and to become clear. That's what yoga is. And in a way, we are just like clinging on dogmas and swallowing anything just raw because we want to belong to something or have an identity with something. That's our starting point, but that can also just make us more ignorant. After some time, knowledge,
so it has to be a personal thing.
It has to make you free. It has to make you see clearly. Right. It has to experience it from within. And that is yoga. You can't kind of force a form or a method.
Do you see the asanas as a kind of springboard, maybe, like the yoga asanas? Because I see many people that I know they would have never in a million years picked up a copy of the Bhagavad Gita, become vegetarian without doing asana. So does it, in your mind, kind of act as a valid springboard or a way into a deeper appreciation of yoga, on a kind of more generalized level? Yeah,
certainly. I mean, like, to just from personal experience, I started my physical asana practice. I had no intention studying the Bhagavad Gita or the deeper spiritual. I just wanted the physical kind of high, and I was like ambitious and had a drive or wanted to kind of wrestle with the postures and the tradition. But after some time, when you learn the practice of surrender, when you learn to let go, when you can develop greater prolonged, experience of steadiness and balance of the mind, then you become more intuitive to what, the longing for the soul to be free. You there is an inert longing within us all to be free. And when we trace wisdom, and when we are like tracing the source of something truly beautiful, meaningful, and delightful within us, we learn after some time to navigate and discriminate. And then we turn away from negative patterns, and then we learn how to develop more constructive patterns.
I suppose this is a good point to ask you about tradition. The way that you're speaking now, it seems that tradition ultimately kind of only, how do you say, constricts us, limits us to like a personal inquiry, or is tradition a very good stabilizing tool? I mean, you've had some ups and downs with the Ashtanga tradition over the last few years, right?
I mean, but first of all, I am deeply grateful for the Ashtanga tradition. I am deeply grateful for my time with Guruji, for the time with Sharat, and for what the kind of Ashtanga tradition gave me. It kind of, in a way, now, it raised me and it formed me. It gave me my kind of bread and butter. And I'm deeply grateful for that, for the whole Ashtanga yoga tradition. But, as I have inquired into the yoga tradition, I also have seen, the certain, not tragedy, but just the sad thing, how the tradition itself can make you blind, and tradition itself can, make people full of fear and how do I say it? Stiff and rigid, because they see is the tradition. When a tradition is good, I mean, you have a lot of various, you could say dogmatic tradition. The ultimate dogmatic tradition in India, anyway, is the Mimamsa tradition, because they focus very much on rituals and how to do certain things day in, day out in order to get certain benefits from that. And that in itself, when it's just done blindly, it kind of, or if it's done driven by desires, it kind of easily leads to a kind of a continuing of seeking of new desires and wanting more and more and more. But a good tradition that kind of comes from a sort of wisdom and people who have, experienced the method, that tradition is trying to shape people into blossoming and developing their own, kind of individual genuinity. But when it comes to our Ashtanga tradition, considering that Pattabhi Jois grew out of a very traditional Brahmanic kind of tradition, his method and the way he was taught by Krishnamacharya were quite strict on what.
I mean, the tradition, in a way, didn't it help you at the start? You were mentioning the way that he kind of broke your ego at the start. Wasn't that kind of part of the whole traditional method?
Of course. I mean, it was his methodology of teaching, and to me that worked well. But I think that the Ashtanga tradition, what is good about it is that if you do the practice and it awakens intelligence, it's good. But when it follow without questioning and just like copy somebody else's method without understanding it from themselves, they lose the inner essence.
So how do we navigate with tradition to get the best out of it whilst kind of keeping a freedom of inquiry and rather than becoming kind of prejudiced and blinkered, dogmatic?
But ultimately, any tradition is a stepping stone into a greater experience of beingness that can never be defined in words or dogma themselves. But every tradition has its limitations, and many traditions, they kind of crumble up and die after a few years because they are pacified, or they become nullified by the dogma and they lose the inner essence. And I feel like I said earlier, I feel deeply grateful for the Ashtanga tradition that I belong to. But I feel like any tradition, I mean, if you look at the history of India, the greatness of the kind of, the greatness or ungreatness of the Vedic tradition can be argued, but the glory of the Indian philosophies that were kind of presented in the Vedas, they were rejected by the Buddhists and the Jains and the kind of unorthodox system. And in that very rejection, they had to redefine themselves. In that kind of various, opposition that they felt from the Buddhist and the Jain, the Hindu tradition had to be clearer. And in that kind of new articulation that came about, that's where you see the rise of the whole kind of sutra, with a kind of, with the Shabdarshana tradition or the classical Indian philosophies.
So it became more rigid in a kind of clarification. No, the other way around.
The other way around. So like when something had become too rigid, people oppose it. And when they realized that rigidity was kind of turning a lot of people away, they had to redefine themselves and clarify what they were really about. And that's when you saw the kind of new rise of Hinduism, really, after the kind of the great, not wars, but the kind of all the debates and discussions that they had with the Buddhists and the Jains. They needed to become clear of what they were actually doing. And so then you saw that the tradition itself redefined itself. If it would have done that, it would have just kind of lost itself in dogmas, and it would have been a form, a method, and the inner essence was lost. And I think all traditions should be custodian and caretaker of inner essence. That inner essence need to be defined, and it need to be. One need to remind oneself of what that inner essence is really about. It's so easy to hide behind dogmas and kind of used up old concepts, but if that inner essence is not touched, and if that inner essence is lost, naturally the tradition will just wear itself out, and it can run on dogmatic principle for a long time, but eventually it will die, because that
on a pragmatic level, where are you at with your teaching now? How do you like? Are you very traditional, or do you allow more leeway for the individual to find themselves in the yoga? I mean, the way that you were taught was very rigid and very kind of traditional and going through the Ashtanga system. But now the way you're talking leads me to suggest that maybe your teaching on a practical level has changed within the way that you show the asanas or allow people with the asanas. How would you describe your teaching changing, or has it changed?
Well, basically, I think for any kind of beginner teacher, when you set up, you just copy what you learned from your previous teachers without questioning. And I try to just blindly copy what I learned from Guruji and Sharat, and that was just like my method, and I kind of blindly followed that, and I was quite rigid with the kind of system, how it should be taught, and the methodology and all of that. And after some time, of course, I realized that, hey, this doesn't work for everybody. This is not a very good kind of way to go about it for normal people who need to go to work every day. When that being said, I mean, I've been teaching Mysore style for almost 20 years, and I very much enjoy teaching in that kind of Mysore environment. But when it comes to just like following the postures blindly and very rigidly, I see that it has a purpose, and it works out in a good way for people who are patient enough to benefit from it. But it can also come with some drawbacks and negative side effects, when people are older, and when people don't learn how to strengthen their muscles and stuff on the side and just keep, stretching on the muscle, obviously it's going to become weak and it's going to injure you rather than help you.
So can you give any examples of how you modify, how you might modify the sequence? I mean, just on a practical level.
Well, of course, there are many ways of modifying the sequence. So sometimes, for people who are very stiff ankles and knees, obviously you let them, past Ardha Baddha Paschimottanasana, or, if they can't do Marichasana B and D, for instance, you let them, you be a bit generous and you let them move on. But naturally, a lot of people, they encounter some problems in Bhujapidasana, Kurmasana, things like that. But my method is not so much about the form and how to do it perfectly. My method is much more use the form to find out something about yourself. What is it that makes you, hard and stiff here? And I try to follow much more that kind of philosophical approach and help people to turn their awareness inwards and try to feel and appreciate stiffness and rigidity they feel, and that they can really embrace that. And then I feel there's an openness for change. But when it comes to just the kind of physical rigidity of like following a certain method, I feel that the practice works great wonder who people are, patient enough to do it. But obviously, if you have people coming who are, late in their late 40s, 50s, and some to early 60s, I always modify and try to simplify the method. So then, instead of doing vinyasas between both sides, I do just, between postures, because I don't want to wear people down. And I try to, think of what's essential. It's the breath, it's that internal observation, and it's how you kind of build peace of mind and steadiness of mind in what you do. The problem for a lot of young people, they are too ambitious, they're too keen, they're too driven by results and their personal agendas, and they miss the whole point. And sometimes you have to, like me, I had to run wild for a couple of years before I was even ready to understand yoga,
That was certainly my own perspective, experience on it. What do you think about effort, though? I mean, there's the quality of tapas in the yoga, discipline, the effort, the striving. I mean, does that not play a part as well? I mean, I like your idea of acceptance, and I kind of agree. Sometimes you can, by pushing against rigidity, you only create something which is worse. But then again, isn't there something to do with the obstacles and the challenges and the struggle towards the goal?
I mean, if you look at the commentary by Vyasa on, on the Yoga Sutras, like the second chapter on Sadhanapada, and he says, tapasvadya yeshvara panidani kriya yoga. He says, tapasya vina yoga nasidyati. Like, without effort, nothing is ever accomplished in yoga. Without discipline, you can argue, okay, what is tapas? But ultimately, tapas means a form of discipline, a form of encountering your experience of polarity within discipline or effort. We can come to experiencing ourselves in a new way. When the effort becomes rigid, just because you become obsessed about something, it's going to backfire or give you trouble or further on. But when effort is done in a balanced way, then the effort that we do is the kind of first initial step to kind of produce some heat in the body so transformation can come about. Without effort, nothing can ever really change. And when we are like deeply coated in ignorance, how can we ever step out of this layer of ignorance unless we use a certain effort? It's impossible, I believe.
But the effort has to be quite subtle then, because you can easily make, as I think we both did in our youth, the over effort, and then you end up kind of only hurting yourself and kind of closing the door of yoga in a way, which is something to do with acceptance, isn't it? And humility.
No, yeah, that's a very good point you mentioned there. Definitely. I mean, when this effort, like I said, become rigid, it hurts you and it harms you. But what I mean by effort is the willingness to face yourself. When an effort is driven by desire and ambition, it has nothing to do with yoga. But when an effort is done with a willingness to face, to look at all sides of your being, because tapas is really there to balance out the polar opposites of the good and bad, the likes and dislikes within us. So when we use effort as a tool to transcend, the good and the bad, the likes and dislikes, etc., then a kind of new light of experience may shine forth. Obviously,
isn't tapas in a way then is maybe tapas is the quality of honesty, or trying to engender really honesty towards life.
Well, tapas embodies, everything that has to do with, the bravery of self-introspection. Really, the fundamental teachings of yoga, if we look at it, it's kind of, how do we understand our own prakriti constitution? How can I see, all the things within me that is changing, and to really understand the subtle components of the sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic principles within me, and then eventually transcend that. And then what remains is the purity of spirit, whatever you want to call it. And then naturally what happens is there's a diminishing of imbalances within our nature, within our mind, within prakriti. But for that to come about, first we have to see ourselves fully and more clearly as we are, rather than how we want to be or how we want to be perceived. And that's, I think, is the beauty of tapas, that it's a kind of honest approach of inquiring, a kind of, you could say, inquiring with effort, because everything that needs to, if you want to sharpen a knife, you need a grindstone. Without the grindstone, the knife will just remain blunt. And it's the same with our practice of yoga. It's the sharpening of our own prakriti constitution and understanding our inherent quality more fully and developing that, and then eventually letting go of that. So when it comes to the physical practice that we do, if you're just doing like a kind of bodybuilder approach, it's just for the physical asanas or for the form or for the the feel-good factor that you get after the practice, that in the beginning, that kind of effort will wear you out, or it will disappoint you. But when an effort is done seeking truth, seeking our internal support, seeking clarity, then we start uncovering something truly beautiful. But that, in essence, that can be defined. It just happens to affect your physical, mental, emotional condition. And when it makes you more, a more, beautiful, harmonious, loving, kind person, then the things are working. If it makes you more rigid, arrogant, stiff, or, mentally depressed, then it is not working. We're doing
the effort's done on the inside, but there's something to do with the quality of the effort, like kind of how we judge it on the outside as well. I mean, you do this work for with the back in the ring, with people that have had a history of addictions. Does yoga have a kind of responsibility then to translate on the outside of us after doing that in the internal work?
But the yoga is such a beautiful tool for transformation if we're willing to look at ourselves. But as long as we are looking outwards and we using yoga to become something ourselves, I mean, every young person wants to become rich and famous or beautiful. That's naturally within us. And if we use yoga in the same way, we may become very rich, beautiful, or whatever, but eventually we will end up depressed. Because if you don't taste that inner sweetness of yoga, and it becomes just like a fanciful word that we use of a kind of spiritual quest, yoga, when it's at its best, it harmonizes us, it relaxes us, and it makes us embrace life and feel, harmony with life and people around us. And what I wanted to say about Back in the Ring, I started simply as a personal inquiry to see, could yoga work for former inmates and drug addicts? And when I moved back to Norway in 2010, I have had the privilege of, I lived a good life, and I traveled many places in the world because of yoga. And I just felt I had a duty to give something back to society and to investigate, could yoga have a positive effect? Because I felt the impact it had on myself. And so I sort of started teaching in some few prisons. And then a few years later, I started this project called Back in the Ring, which is now operating in 20 cities around Norway. We have yoga programs for people who have drug addiction. And of course, that was also a project by trial and error. Certain things I learned the hard way, certain things I did good, certain things I did not do so good, simply due to my own ignorance and ambition and trying to help people too much my way rather than help them experiencing their own individual way. But what I learned is like if yoga is used as a tool to help people to look at themselves, and if they're willing to do the effort, there is so many positive things that may break negative patterns. And what I tried with Back in the Ring is just simply to develop healthy patterns that will help people rediscover inner essence that they somehow lost due to wrong turns in life with drugs, crime, negative behavior. And when that inner light is awakened in people and they kind of reawake and they feel joy from within, value from within, and a kind of integrity from within rather than identify with these negative patterns. So there's an awakening of a giant in a way. And
what do you think it is about yoga that's made them, that's the fundamental thing that's helped with the addiction and the kind of rehabilitation? Is there a quality? I mean, I always kind of think it's like just the general daily routine that's the real kind of gift of yoga on a very practical level.
But the beauty of yoga is that it helps you breathe. And when we receive the breath in a deeper way inside of us, then starts the process of uncovering, tension and strain, traumas and various suffering we have been subject to that limits us. So the most beautiful thing I feel yoga can do is to kind of connect people with a sense of beingness that is unconditioned by thought and patterns and various previous wrong identifications. And when a yoga practice is good, and it centers around bringing people home to themselves and helping people experience the simplicity of life. There's a joy that awakens in people when people feel that joy, they realize, hey, the drugs that I take, that my sneaky behaviors or trying to be tricky to make a quick fix of money, that's never going to make me happy. What makes me happier is like in a balance. It's a kind of calm, temperate mind. It's like feeling a connectedness with this being. When that beingness is switched on in individual, you see that there's a new connection with life. And I think that in itself is the beauty of yoga in work with people who have suffered drug addiction or been caught up in, too much criminal activity, because it can break those old patterns, and it can reawake a deeper quality of beingness that helps them start to appreciate the simplicity of life, and that real life is about feeling connected from within. Real life has nothing to do with how much money you make, how other people look at you, what kind of house you live in. Being present with this switched on, then it's much easier to kind of deal with the kind of negative patterns that we have accumulated in our mind and body.
Alex, we're running out of time. It's a fascinating experiment and a really inspiring project. And I've seen it for a number of years, and I've kept my eye on it, and I'm really, really impressed and pleased that that's happening.
I must say that like nothing have also humbled me more to realizing that, practicing one method one method doesn't work for all people. And ultimately, real yoga is never about the form, but it's about kind of life itself. And what I experienced with many of these drug addicts that I worked with, that I realized sometimes I am the problem. I am the problem of my teachings, that I try too hard instead of try to see them where they are.
Ultimately, the teacher becomes an obstacle.
Yeah, and I must say that there's so much beauty in the world of yoga, but sometimes us as yoga teachers get in the way when we get wrong, and we get so caught up in the things we do, thinking it's the only way and the only method. There is innumerable methods, and ultimately yoga is about life itself and connecting with life and implementing this very, you could say, essence of yoga into the things we do. And when we're able to do that with clarity and openness of mind and not resentness and rigidity, then things become great. Everything we touch turns into gold, and we experience that life and nature, at least that's my experience. Everybody deserves prosperity, and not in a stupefied sense like, this modern new age thing, but what I mean, everybody, wellness and prosperity and a good life is there for everybody to embrace and be lifted up to. But it's just about, what kind of eyes are we seeing with? How are we able to really embrace, how do I say it? I mean, like, life wants to shape us all into, healthy, prosperous individual. but sometimes we shrink from life and we hide from life because we don't dare to fully embrace things.
And there's like a quote in the Bhagavad Gita that don't allow life to shrink from you, or don't shrink towards life either. Something like that, anyway.
Well, yeah, there's much to say about Bhagavad Gita, but ultimately it's like you don't run away from your difficulties and challenges. Face them with an inner balance and use yoga as a kind of tool to engage with life in a better way. Then great things happen to you.
And sorry to lighten the mood, but I wanted to kind of end on a lighter note with you. What do you do, to embrace life outside the literal practice of yoga? What do you talk about hiking the mountains?
Well, I'm practicing 7 series now. I have 3
baby.
kids at home, and so it's like full on, and that's trying to have a positive mindset. Despite the fact that you didn't get enough sleep and sometimes you feel overworked and you're tired, but just trying to see the good in people and to recognize the suffering of people and recognize the ignorance of everybody around you, and how we get kind of swallowed up in that ignorance, and that ignorance eventually make us drown. And I'm just trying not to drown myself, basically. I'm trying to stay afloat. That's what inspires me. So my kids inspire me, my wife inspires me, my work inspires me. And of course, good literature inspires me, a good film, good music, all of these things inspire me.
It's been a wonderful interview, and I hope we can speak again soon, Alex. Thank you for joining.